They toasted my sister with wine my mother hadn't paid for. They called me a mistake in front of 40 people. They'd already spent money that was never theirs, on a house that was already slipping out of their hands. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just watched a lawyer stand up from a corner table, a folder under his arm, and the room went quiet in a way I will never forget. But before the folder, there was the toast. My name is Denise Halloran. I am 33 years old. I did not raise my voice that night. I did not need to. Carol Halloran set down her wine glass. She looked across the table at the Wagon Wheel Steakhouse, and she said it, light, almost cheerful. You were always the mistake, Denise. You know that. She said it the way you'd mention the weather. My father laughed, a short laugh, through his nose, like he'd been waiting all night for someone else to say it first. 40 people sat at that table. Aunts, cousins, my sister's future in-laws, people from my parents' church. Half of them laughed too, the nervous kind, the kind that comes out before you decide if a joke was really a joke. I picked up my water glass. I drank from it. I set it back down. I don't get loud, I told myself. That's the line I always used. I get accurate. My sister Amber sat at the head of the table, her ring hand out where everyone could see it. 2 carats, picked by her fiancé's family. My parents didn't have $30 for a hair appointment, but somehow there was a ring like that. Amber smiled at the joke about me. The way you smile at something you've heard so many times it stopped being cruelty. It just became a fact about her sister, the older one, the plain one, the mistake. 9 years. That's how long I'd been driving 40 minutes each way, every Sunday, sometimes twice a week when things got bad, to check on my grandmother Ruth. 9 years of oil changes and gas station coffee, pulling into her gravel driveway before the sun was even up, because Sunday mornings were when she liked her eggs the most, and because somebody had to be there who wasn't asking her for anything. I never told anyone I did it. I didn't do it to be told. My mother didn't do it. My father didn't do it. My sister came twice a year, Christmas and sometimes her birthday. She left a photo of herself with Ruth on the mantel, like a receipt. To the happy couple, my father said, raising his glass. He'd already moved on from the joke about me. And to a fresh start for this family. A fresh start. I turned that phrase over in my head, because I knew something they didn't. 6 months earlier, at the reading of my grandmother's general estate, a man named Marcus Whitcomb had looked at me across a conference table. Longer than he looked at either of my parents. I hadn't understood why. Not yet. Grandma Ruth used to sit on her porch shelling peas into a chipped ceramic bowl. Every single time, without fail, she'd say the same thing. Count carefully. You'll only need to do it once. I thought she meant the peas. She had no idea what she'd just handed me. Sitting there with that bowl in her lap, I had no idea either, not for another 5 months. But here's what nobody at that table knew. Not my mother, not my father, not my sister with her new ring catching the light. A sealed folder was sitting 40 minutes away on Depot Street, waiting for exactly this kind of room, exactly this kind of cruelty. My grandmother had told her lawyer plainly before she died. They'll say something at a table. They always do. She was right, and she'd built for that moment the way some people build a bomb shelter. Quiet, patient, years in advance. I did not know it yet. Sitting there, my water glass sweating a ring onto the tablecloth, that in about 40 minutes a man in a gray suit would stand up, that he'd read one sentence out loud, that it would end my parents financially before dessert was even cleared. I did not know the land my father called worthless clay had a gas company circling it. For 2 years, I did not know my name was already written into a trust worth more than the house they'd refinanced twice. To cover a debt they thought no one could trace back to them. I only knew this. I had been called a mistake in front of 40 people, and I hadn't flinched, because somewhere behind that calm was a woman who'd counted every page of every document Ruth Halloran ever signed, and who was about to be very glad she had. But let me take you back. 6 weeks before that dinner, because that's really where this starts. My grandmother's funeral was small. Cedar Grove doesn't do big funerals. It does casseroles and handshakes, folding chairs in a church basement that smells like coffee and carpet cleaner no matter what year it is. I sat in the second row. My parents sat in the front, next to my sister, holding hands like people who'd rehearsed grief in a mirror. I noticed Marcus Whitcomb before I noticed almost anyone else. He stood near the back. His suit fit him too well for Cedar Grove. He watched the family file past the casket, and when I passed him, he nodded. Just at me. Not my mother, not my father, me. I didn't think much of it that day. Grief does strange things to attention. You notice small gestures. You forget entire conversations. It wasn't until the reading of the general estate that I understood the nod had meant something. 3 days later, his office on Depot Street. The general estate was simple. The farmhouse on Milner Road, split 3 ways between my parents and my aunt. My aunt lived in Arizona. She hadn't seen Ruth in 4 years. The savings account, $11,000, split the same way. A modest life insurance policy that mostly covered the funeral. My parents left that meeting satisfied. The way people look when a transaction goes exactly as expected, when nobody has to feel anything else about it. I left feeling like something was missing. I couldn't have told you what. Denise, Marcus said, catching me in the hallway. Everyone else was already filing toward the parking lot. Can I get 5 minutes? I remember thinking it was odd. A lawyer asking to keep the one heir who wasn't fighting for anything. My parents had already claimed the biggest share. My aunt had waived her interest for a cash buyout. I hadn't said a word through the whole reading. I hadn't expected anything. Ruth raised me on peas and quiet Sunday mornings, not promises. There's a folder, Marcus told me. His office door was closed. Just the two of us and a desk covered in case files older than me. Separate from the estate file. Your grandmother asked me to hold it. Not read yet. Hold it for what? He looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look you give someone when you're deciding how much truth they can carry on a Tuesday afternoon. For later, he said. She was specific about the timing. I don't fully understand her reasoning, but I trusted her for 30 years. I'm going to keep trusting her a little longer. I didn't push. That's not who I am. I said, thank you. I shook his hand. I drove home wondering what my grandmother could possibly have that needed to wait. I didn't know about the roll-top desk yet. Not really. I mean, I knew it existed. It had sat in the corner of Ruth's sitting room my whole life. A heavy oak thing. One drawer locked since before I was born, as far as I knew. My mother had asked about it once, years ago. Ruth just laughed. That's not for opening yet, either. Then she went back to her peas. Nobody in my family asks a second time when Ruth says something like that. We'd learned. Pressing her only made the answer smaller. I went back to work the following Monday. 8-hour shifts cleaning teeth, calming down nervous patients, color-coding prescription refill charts nobody asked me to color code. That's how my mind organizes chaos. One small system at a time. I didn't think about the folder again for almost 3 weeks. It was my mother who brought it back. The way my mother brings everything back, by asking me for something. We need you to sign a quitclaim, she said over the phone. That voice she does when she wants something. like she's already decided I'll say yes before she's finished the sentence. On the farmhouse. Just to keep things simple with your aunt's buyout. Simple how? You have a third interest, technically, since you're listed as a contingent beneficiary if your aunt's share falls through. It's nothing. A formality. Your father wants it cleaned up before the appraisal. I sat with that for a second. A third interest, technically. Nobody had told me that during the reading. Nobody had told me that at all. Send me the paperwork, I said. I'll look at it. Denise, it's not complicated. Just sign it and mail it back. I'll look at it. I let the silence after it do the work. My mother hated silence more than she hated losing an argument. Fine, she said. Whatever. Your father will be disappointed. He was always disappointed. It was basically his resting expression. I did not sign anything. I called Marcus instead. Marcus picked up on the second ring, like he'd been half expecting the call. They want me to sign away my interest in the farmhouse, I said. A third interest I didn't know I had? That's accurate, he said. You're listed as a contingent beneficiary on that portion. Most people wouldn't fight over it. I'm not fighting over it. I want to know why nobody mentioned it at the reading. A pause on the line. The kind lawyers give you. Deciding how much truth belongs to you today. Denise, I can't get ahead of your grandmother's instructions, but don't sign anything for your parents right now. Not the quitclaim. Not anything else. If they ask again, tell them you're consulting your own attorney. I don't have my own attorney. You do now, he said. I could hear something almost warm underneath the flat professional tone. Call me before you sign anything. Anything at all. I hung up feeling like I'd been handed a rope in the dark, without being told what it was tied to. My mother called again 4 days later. Sharper this time, the patience gone. Your father talked to the bank, she said. They need the interests cleared up before the refinance closes. Why are you making this a big deal? I'm not making it anything. I told you I'd look at it. You've had it for a week. I hadn't had it at all. They still hadn't sent me the paperwork. This call wasn't about a document. It was about pressure. Steady. Disguised as reasonable. Send the paperwork, I said. I'll have someone look at it. Someone? Who's someone? My attorney. 3 full seconds of silence. For my mother, that's an eternity. Since when do you have an attorney? Since Grandma left me something to think about, I said. Not quite a lie. Not quite the truth either. I let her sit with the confusion instead of clearing it up. She hung up without saying goodbye. That was fine. I didn't need her to. I drove out to the farmhouse that weekend, the way I always had. Except now the drive felt different. Loaded with a question I didn't have words for yet. The house sat quiet on Milner Road. It had sat quiet for 5 months, waiting for someone to decide what to do with it. The way old houses wait. Patient. A little reproachful. I let myself in with the key I'd had since I was 19. Nobody had changed the locks. Nobody had thought to. The roll-top desk still sat in the corner, dust gathering in the grain. The locked drawer exactly as locked as it had always been. I ran my hand over the top of it. The way you touch something you've been told never to touch. Testing if the rule still applies now that the person who made it is gone. It was in the kitchen, going through a box nobody had claimed. That's where I found Ruth's old Bible, the spine soft from decades of handling. I almost left it in the box. I don't know what made me open it. Except it felt wrong to leave her Bible sitting in cardboard. A business card fell out from between the pages. Daniel Reyes, Land Acquisitions, Buckeye Ridge Energy Partners, a Columbus number printed clean across the bottom. On the back, in Ruth's handwriting. Small and careful, the way she wrote everything. 4 words. Don't let them sell the ground. I stood in that kitchen for a long time, holding a business card and a Bible. feeling something start to assemble itself in my head, still missing most of its pieces, but no longer entirely formless. My father had told me, more than once, that the farmland was basically worthless. Clay soil. No good for anything but the dairy operation Ruth shut down 15 years ago, when her hip gave out. He said it the way he said most things about property he wanted moved quickly. Flat, final, discouraging questions. A gas company doesn't send a business card to a woman sitting on worthless clay. I put the card in my purse. I put the Bible back in the box, gently. The way you handle something you finally understand you'd been careless with. I didn't call my father to ask about it. I called Marcus again. That number was becoming the only place in my life where questions got real answers. I found something, I told him. I described the card, the handwriting, the 4 words on the back. A longer pause this time. "Can you bring that to my office?" he said. "Tomorrow if you can." "Marcus, what is going on?" "Tomorrow." Gentle, immovable. The way Ruth used to be about the peas. "I promise it will make more sense once you're sitting across from me." I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the way Ruth used to stand at the kitchen window some mornings, watching the patch of land behind the barn, not doing anything, just watching, like she was keeping an eye on something the rest of us couldn't see. The next afternoon, I sat across from Marcus Whitcomb, his office on Depot Street. 6 weeks earlier, my parents had walked out of that same office satisfied. A farmhouse and $11,000, feeling like they'd gotten everything there was to get. Marcus set the business card down on his desk, studied it a moment before he spoke. "Buckeye Ridge has been trying to lease mineral rights on that parcel for 2 years," he said. "Your grandmother turned down 3 offers. The last one, about 8 months before she died, would have made your parents' fight over the farmhouse look like a fight over pocket change. She never told anyone. She told me," he said. "And she told me something else. She said the day would come when your parents needed money badly enough to do something reckless. With property they didn't fully understand. And when that day came, she wanted the ground itself protected, not signed away in a panic to cover a debt that had nothing to do with it." I sat very still, the way I sit when a patient tells me something that changes how I need to treat them, not letting my face show the recalculation happening underneath. "What debt?" I said. Marcus opened a drawer, slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. A refinance filing, county recorded, 4 months old. My parents' names on it. The farmhouse listed as collateral, for a sum considerably larger than the house was worth. "They refinanced," I said slowly, "a house they don't fully own." "They refinanced their 2/3 interest," Marcus said. "Legal, technically, though it left a mess for the bank, given the aunt's buyout and your own contingent share. But that's not the interesting part." "What's the interesting part?" "What the loan was actually for," Marcus said. "It wasn't the house. Your grandmother asked me to keep an eye on certain things after she was gone. I don't take that kind of instruction lightly. 2 years ago, your parents co-signed a business loan for your sister's boutique. It failed within 14 months. They've been quietly covering the shortfall ever since. 4 months ago, they were 3 payments behind on their own mortgage because of it." I thought about the toast, to a fresh start for this family. I thought about my sister's ring, 2 carats her fiancé's family paid for, because apparently my parents didn't have $30 to spare. "They need money," I said. "Badly." "Badly enough," Marcus said. "If this parcel's mineral rights got discovered and valued, before certain other things were settled, it could complicate a great deal for them. That's precisely why your grandmother built the second trust the way she did." "The folder," I said. "The folder." For the first time since Ruth's funeral, he almost smiled. She was specific that it not be opened until a particular kind of moment arrived. A public one, a cruel one in her words. She told me, and I'm quoting her exactly, because I wrote it down at the time. They'll say something at a table. They always do. Open it then, and not a day before. I sat with that for a long moment, something settling into place, something that had been loose and rattling inside me for 6 weeks. There's an engagement dinner, I said slowly, in 3 weeks. My sister and her fiancé. My parents are hosting it at the Wagon Wheel. Marcus nodded, unsurprised, like he'd already guessed as much. Then I suppose I should clear my calendar. You're going to come to a family dinner. Your grandmother's instructions were specific about attendance, too, he said. I'm invited, apparently. Whether your parents know it or not. She arranged it through your sister's own wedding planner. 6 months before she died. Listed simply as a family friend. I almost laughed. The first real almost laugh in weeks. Thinking of my grandmother, dead 5 months, still 6 steps ahead of everyone at that table, still moving pieces into place from somewhere none of us could see. What's in the folder? I asked. You'll find out the same night everyone else does, Marcus said. That was her one condition. Even for you. I drove home that evening, the business card back in my purse, a strange, unfamiliar calm settling over me. Not the calm of knowing exactly what was coming, the calm of knowing, for the first time in a very long time, that someone had been paying attention to me all along, even after she was gone. I did not tell my parents about the card. I did not tell them about the loan filing. I let the 3 weeks pass exactly the way they wanted them to pass, full of wedding talk and venue deposits. My mother calling twice more about the quitclaim, each time a little more clipped, a little more anxious underneath the clip. I did not sign it. I never signed it. I just kept counting, quietly, the way Ruth taught me to, waiting for the moment she'd already known was coming. I want to back up for a moment. There's a piece of this I haven't told you yet. It matters more than it seemed to at the time. About a month after Ruth's funeral, before any of this had a shape, I drove out to the farmhouse on a Wednesday evening. No particular reason, just restless. The way you get restless in a house that isn't yours anymore, but still holds every version of you that ever mattered. I found the barn door unlatched. That alone was strange. My father had a habit of checking every lock on that property twice. A habit from decades of dairy work, where an unlatched gate could cost you a whole herd overnight. I pushed the door open, expecting raccoons, or wind, or nothing at all. Instead, I found my father standing in the middle of the empty barn, alone, in the dark, just standing there. Dad? He startled, actually startled, which I had almost never seen him do. Denise, I didn't hear your car. What are you doing out here? He was quiet a long moment, looking around at the empty stalls, the hooks where equipment used to hang, all of it stripped and sold or rusted to nothing years before. I used to work this barn every morning before school, he said finally. 4:30, wake up. My father never once said thank you. Not once. In 18 years. I didn't say anything. I let him keep going. I had never once heard my father talk about his own father. Not really. Not beyond the flat obituary facts everyone already knew. I swore I'd never build something on a place like this, he said. Somewhere that could just get handed down to whoever. Based on nothing but who happened to be born first, or born a boy, or born convenient. And then I look at my own life and I think, what did I actually build differently? I thought, standing there in that dark barn, that this was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever heard from him. I did not know yet about the loan, or the refinance, or any of what was coming. I only knew my father, standing alone in an empty barn at dusk, looked smaller than I had ever seen him look. For one strange moment, I almost felt sorry for him. You could still build something different, I said. It's not too late. He looked at me a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Your grandmother used to say something like that, he said, about starting late. She never explained what she meant. I think about that barn conversation often now. Looking back, I believe some part of him already suspected it. The ground beneath him, literally and otherwise, was not as solid as he needed it to be. He just didn't have the words for it yet. Fear rarely announces itself as fear. It usually shows up first as an old man standing alone in an empty barn, talking about a father who never said thank you. I didn't tell Marcus about that conversation for a long time. It felt too private, too much like something that belonged only to me and my father. Whatever fragile thing had passed between us in the dark that evening. But I thought about it again, 3 weeks before the dinner. My mother called about the down payment. My father called about the loose ends, both of them circling the same fear from different directions. Neither of them naming it directly, the way our family never named anything directly if it could be avoided. I also want to tell you about the last real conversation I had with Ruth, 6 months before she died. It explained something about why I never once doubted what she was building, even when I didn't understand it yet. She was in the hospital by then, a short stay. Nothing that seemed urgent at the time, just her heart being a little tired, the way hearts get tired after 80-some years of faithful work. I sat beside her bed on a Sunday afternoon, the visit itself unremarkable, until she reached over and took my hand, which she almost never did. She was a woman who showed affection through eggs and peas and quiet presence, not touch. Denise, she said, I need you to promise me something. And I need you to actually keep the promise, not just say yes to make an old woman feel better. Okay, I said. I promise. When the time comes, and you'll know it when it comes, don't apologize for taking what's yours. Your mother is going to make you feel guilty. She's very good at it. She's had 30 years of practice. Don't let her turn something you earned into something you owe an apology for. I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not then. I thought she was talking about something small, some old grudge about a birthday gift or a missed holiday. I said, okay again, because that's what you say to a woman in a hospital bed, holding your hand like it matters more than anything else in the room. Count carefully, she added, the way she always did. I laughed a little, thinking it was just her being herself, her familiar refrain about peas and patience. I always do, Grandma. I know you do, she said. That's why I trust you with this. I didn't ask what this meant. I didn't know there was a this to ask about. I just held her hand a while longer. We talked about small things, the weather, the nurses, whether the hospital coffee was as bad as everyone always said it was. When I left that evening, I had no idea I had just been handed the first piece of a conversation, one that would take 5 more months and one very public dinner to finish. She died 11 weeks later, quietly, in her sleep, in the same farmhouse bedroom where she'd slept for over 50 years. My father found her the next morning. I got the call at 6:15, drove the 40 minutes in a fog I still can't fully describe, replaying that hospital conversation the entire way, the promise I'd made without understanding what I was promising. I think about that drive often, especially now, sitting on the porch some evenings with a bowl of peas in my lap. The way she used to sit. I think about how much of what mattered most in my life she managed to plant quietly, in small conversations, months or years before I would ever need to understand them. The way a farmer plants in one season for a harvest she may never live to see herself. By the time the engagement dinner rolled around, I had carried that hospital promise for 5 months, without fully knowing what I was carrying. Don't apologize for taking what's yours. I understood it, finally, standing at that table with my mother's cruel words still hanging in the air. In a way I could not have understood any earlier. Some promises only make sense once the moment they were built for finally arrives. My sister Amber called me 9 days before the dinner, unusual enough that I almost didn't answer. "Mom says you're being difficult about the house thing," she said. No hello. Straight into it. "I'm not being anything." I told her I'd have someone look at the paperwork. "You don't need a lawyer, Denise. It's family. Family sent me a quitclaim form. Didn't tell me I had an interest in the property until I asked why." I kept my voice level, flat, the way I kept most things when Amber called with someone else's talking points loaded into her mouth. "That's not a family conversation. That's a legal document," she sighed. The long-suffering sigh she perfected around age 14. Never once updated since. "You always do this. You always make everything so complicated." "I make things accurate," I said. "There's a difference." "Whatever. Can you just come to the dinner and not make it weird? Derek's parents are going to be there. His whole family. I don't need you and Mom sniping at each other." "I've never sniped at Mom in my life, Amber. You know what I mean." I did know what she meant. Don't sit there being the quiet one. Don't make everyone else's cheerfulness feel forced by comparison. Don't remind anyone you exist in a way that requires acknowledgement. I'd been managing that request my whole life. I'd gotten good at it. So good I almost didn't notice anymore how much it cost. "I'll be there," I said. "I'll be polite. That's all I'm asking." She hung up without asking how I was doing, without asking about 9 years of Sunday drives, without asking anything at all, except whether I planned to behave. I set my phone down on the counter. I looked at it for a while. The way you look at something familiar that just showed you a shape you'd never quite let yourself see clearly before. 2 days later, my mother tried again. In person this time. She showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening with a tin of lemon bars, the kind she made every year for the church bake sale, the kind of gesture that in our family functioned less like affection, more like a down payment on a request. "I brought these," she said, setting the tin on my counter like an offering. "You always liked them." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. Because I did like them. Gratitude and clarity aren't opposites. Whatever my family seemed to believe. She sat at my small kitchen table, glancing around my apartment, cataloging it, comparing it silently to whatever standard she carried for what a 33-year-old woman's life should look like. "About the quitclaim," she started. "I told you, I'm having it looked at." "By who, Denise? An actual lawyer? Or are you just saying that to slow things down?" I looked at her for a long moment. My mother has a face she makes when she suspects she's losing control of a situation. A tightness around the eyes no pleasant tone can cover. "Marcus Whitcomb," I said. Something flickered across her face. Gone almost as fast as it arrived. But I caught it. The way you catch a shadow at the edge of your vision. "Grandma's lawyer?" He handled her estate. I asked him some questions. About the farmhouse. About my interest in it, yes. She was quiet a moment, turning her coffee cup a quarter turn on my table. A habit I recognized from childhood. The tell that meant she was recalculating. "Your father and I have put a lot into that house," she said finally. Her voice softer now, angling for sympathy instead of pressure. "You know how hard we've worked." "I do know how hard you've worked," I said, and I let that sit there, true and unadorned, because it was true. My parents worked hard their whole lives, at the wrong things, for the wrong reasons. propping up a version of the family that needed someone underneath it, holding the weight, that someone had never once been either of them. Then help us, she said. Sign the quitclaim. Let us get this refinance sorted. Amber and Derek need help with the down payment. We want to give them a real start. There it was. Not the house. Not even really the loan. A fresh start. My father had toasted it before I even knew what that phrase was covering. I'll think about it, I said. The same answer I'd been giving for 3 weeks. She'd finally, visibly, stopped believing it. She left without finishing her coffee. She took the lemon bars with her when she went. That told me more about where things stood between us than anything she said out loud. I called Marcus that night, told him about the visit, the tightness around her eyes, the mention of Amber's down payment. They're desperate, he said, not unkindly, just factually. The way a doctor describes a diagnosis. Desperate people make mistakes on paper. I'd expect more pressure before the dinner, not less. Should I be worried? No, he said. You should be patient. Your grandmother built this to withstand exactly this kind of pressure. The trust language is airtight. I drafted it myself. Had it reviewed by 2 colleagues, specifically because I suspected it might be tested. Why would she go to that much trouble? Marcus was quiet a second. Can I tell you something about your grandmother that I probably shouldn't? Please. She sat in this office about a year before she died, and she cried. Only once. The whole time I knew her, it wasn't about her health. It was about you. She said she'd watched your parents treat you like the load-bearing wall of that family for 30 years. The thing that holds everything up, without anyone ever thanking the wall for standing there. She said, and I'm quoting her again, they'll take her for granted until the day I die. Probably the day after. I'd like to make sure the day after is the day they finally understand what they had. I had to set my phone down for a moment. I picked it back up. She said that? Word for word. I wrote it in my notes. It struck me enough that I wanted to remember it exactly. I thought about the peas, the porch, the chipped ceramic bowl. Count carefully. You'll only need to do it once. I thought about 9 years of Sunday mornings nobody had ever once asked me about. Not really. Not the way you ask about something that matters. 3 weeks, I said. 3 weeks, Marcus agreed. I'll be there at 7. Corner table, like she instructed. You won't need to do anything. Just let the evening happen the way it's going to happen. The days between that call and the dinner moved strangely, slow in some hours, gone before I noticed in others. I went to work. I cleaned teeth. I reorganized the supply closet at the office, alphabetized by manufacturer. Organizing small things helped me hold still around the large thing I was waiting on. My father called once, the Thursday before. Rare enough that I almost missed it. Your mother says you're dragging your feet, he said. No greeting. The same way Amber never bothered with one either. A family trait I was only now noticing as a pattern instead of a habit. I'm reviewing a document, Dad. It's not complicated, Denise. It's a formality. You keep saying that. Because it's true. That land isn't worth anything beyond the house itself. Clay soil. The old dairy equipment's rusted to nothing. Your grandmother let the whole operation go 15 years before she died. There's nothing there to protect. I thought of the business card in my purse. Daniel Reyes, Buckeye Ridge Energy Partners. 4 words in Ruth's careful handwriting on the back. If it's worth nothing, I said, keeping my voice as flat and pleasant as I could manage, then signing shouldn't matter to you either way. A pause. Just long enough for me to hear something underneath his silence that hadn't been there a moment before. It's about simplicity, he said finally, cleaning up loose ends. That's all. I'll have an answer for you by the dinner, I said. True, though not in the way he was hoping to hear it. Fine, he said, and hung up the way he always hung up. No goodbye. Like the call had simply run out of use to him. I sat in my kitchen after that call for a long time, looking at nothing in particular, feeling the shape of the coming night settle into something almost solid. Ruth had built this slowly, over years. The way she built everything, patient hands, quiet timing, never rushing a single stitch. And in 3 days, all of it would come due at once. In a banquet room at the Wagon Wheel Steakhouse, in front of 40 people who had no idea what they were about to witness. I called Marcus one last time before the dinner, mostly just to hear him confirm the plan again. The way you check a lock twice even when you know it's already locked. 7 o'clock, he said. Corner table. I'll wait for the right moment. Your grandmother trusted me to know it when I see it. I intend to. What if the moment doesn't come? Denise. Something almost gentle under the professional register of his voice. In 9 years of watching your family, has there ever been a dinner where the moment didn't come? I didn't have an answer for that. Because he was right, and we both knew it. There's one more thing that happened before the dinner. I've been circling it because it's the part that still makes my chest tight, even now. More than the dinner itself, somehow. 2 weeks before, Amber asked me to help her pick out table linens for the reception hall. A task that had nothing to do with me. Everything to do with her needing someone beside her so she wouldn't be alone with her own nerves. I said yes. I always said yes to things like that. We drove to a rental warehouse outside Columbus. Rows of folding chairs stacked to the ceiling. A woman named Deb, who knew every fabric swatch by heart. Amber held up 2 shades of ivory that looked, to my eye, completely identical. Which one? She said. They're the same, Amber. They're not the same. This one has more warmth. I picked the one on the left, mostly at random. She nodded like I'd confirmed something important. We moved on to napkin folds. All things considered, a perfectly pleasant afternoon between sisters, except for the 10 minutes in the car afterward, sitting in the parking lot before either of us started the engine. Can I ask you something? Amber said. Sure. Do you ever feel like Mom and Dad like me more? I know that sounds stupid. I know I got the ring and the venue and all of it, but sometimes I feel like they don't actually see me either. They just see the wedding, the picture of it. I sat with that for a long moment, surprised. It had never once occurred to me that Amber might feel unseen too, just in a different shape than mine. I think our parents are better at performing love than actually giving it, I said carefully. To either of us. You got the performance. I got left out of it entirely. I'm not sure either version is the real thing. Amber didn't say anything for a while. She looked out the windshield at the loading dock, at nothing in particular. Then she said quietly, "That's kind of the saddest thing I've ever heard. And I think it's true." "Yeah," I said. "I think it's true too." We didn't talk about it again after that. Not directly, but something shifted between us in that parking lot. Some old assumption I'd carried since childhood, that Amber was simply loved, and I simply wasn't. That assumption cracked, just slightly. Enough to let a little light through. Enough that when the dinner happened 2 weeks later, watching her face go pale at our mother's cruelty, I understood. Some part of what I was witnessing was Amber finally seeing the shape of the whole thing too. I also spent part of that week going through Ruth's recipe box. Nobody else in the family had wanted it. A battered tin thing, handwritten cards going back decades. Some so faded I had to hold them up to the window to read them. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Pea soup, cornbread, a pot roast recipe with Wayne's favorite, "Don't change it," written in the corner. That made me smile, despite everything, even in something as small as a recipe card. She'd been thinking about her son, with more tenderness than he probably ever gave her credit for. But tucked behind the recipe for her Sunday pie crust was a folded piece of paper. Not a recipe at all. A short list, in her handwriting, dated about a year before she died. Things Denise doesn't know, I noticed. The tires she changed on my car herself, in the rain, because she wouldn't spend $40 at the shop. The extra egg she always cracks into my breakfast, because she thinks I need the protein and won't say so out loud. The way she never once, in 9 years, complained about the drive. I sat at my kitchen table and cried, reading that list. The good kind of crying. The kind that comes when you finally see, in someone else's careful handwriting, proof that you were never actually invisible. Just unwitnessed. By the people whose witness you'd spent your whole life mistakenly needing most. I brought that list with me to the dinner, folded small, tucked into my purse, alongside the business card and everything else I'd been quietly carrying. I didn't plan to show it to anyone. I just wanted it close, the way you want a small stone in your pocket on a long walk. Proof that something solid exists, even when everything else feels uncertain. I think that list is part of why I didn't cry when my mother called me a mistake. Not because the words didn't land. They did. They landed the way words like that always land. Somewhere old and tender that never fully heals, no matter how much time passes. But underneath the sting, I already had proof, folded small in my purse, that at least one person in that family had seen exactly who I was, had counted every quiet thing I ever did, had decided deliberately it would not go unanswered forever. That's the part I don't think anyone else in that banquet room understood. Watching Marcus stand up with his folder, they thought they were watching a legal reversal, a financial detonation. And it was that, certainly. But for me, sitting there with a handwritten list folded in my purse, it was something quieter and larger at the same time. It was the moment I stopped needing my parents to see me, because someone else already had, and had gone to the trouble of writing it down. There was a Tuesday, about 10 days before the dinner, when I almost broke my own rule, almost told my mother everything I knew. Not because I owed her the warning. Some old habit in me, worn deep as a wagon rut, still wanted to smooth things over before they got worse. I was at the grocery store on Route 9, picking up eggs and coffee filters. I ran into Mrs. Pruitt, who'd lived 2 doors down from Ruth for 40 years, the kind of neighbor who noticed everything, repeated most of it gently, over produce. "Your grandmother used to talk about that back parcel," she said, apropos of nothing, setting a bag of onions in her cart. Said the county kept sniffing around it. Surveyors, men in trucks. She never let on why. "When was this?" I asked, keeping my voice light, the way you keep your voice light when a stranger hands you a piece of a puzzle without knowing it's a puzzle at all. "Oh, years back, before her hip went." She'd wave at them from the porch like she owned every one of their surveys personally. Mrs. Pruitt laughed, a dry little laugh. She moved on to the potatoes. Woman kept her own counsel, that one. Always did. I stood there with a carton of eggs in my hand, thinking about how many people in Cedar Grove had seen small pieces of this over the years, without ever putting it together. Ruth hadn't just protected a secret, she'd scattered it deliberately, in fragments too small for any one person to read as a whole. Only Marcus had the full shape of it. Everyone else got a corner, a glimpse, a business card, a comment over onions. I drove home turning the thought over. Alone in my kitchen, eggs still in their carton on the counter, my phone rang. My mother again. "Denise, I need you to really think about this," she said. No preamble. Straight into the pressure. "Your father's stomach has been in knots for 2 weeks. Do you understand what that refinance means if it falls apart? We lose the house." "I understand exactly what it means," I said, "because by then, I did. Better than she knew. Then help us. Please. I'm asking you to please just sign the form. I closed my eyes for a second, standing in my kitchen, eggs sweating faintly against the counter in the summer heat. I let myself feel, briefly, the old pull of it. 33 years of being the one who fixed things quietly, so nobody else had to feel the weight. It would have been so easy to say yes. It would have cost me nothing that week. It would have cost me everything eventually, the way it always had. I can't sign anything right now, Mom, I said. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to be careful. Careful of what? What is there to be careful of? I don't fully know yet, I said. Almost true. As much as I was willing to give her, but I will soon. We all will. She hung up on that one. Actually hung up, the dial tone flat and final in my ear. I stood there a moment longer, then put the eggs away and went to bed early, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Marcus called the next morning, before I'd even left for work. Unusual enough that I answered still standing in my bathrobe. I wanted to prepare you for something, he said. The bank contacted my office yesterday, informally. Someone in their legal department had heard, through channels I won't speculate about, that there might be a competing interest in the Milner Road parcel. They wanted to know if my office represented any party with a claim. What did you tell them? I told them I couldn't discuss client matters, which is true, which told them everything they needed to know anyway. Lawyers only say that when there's something to not discuss. He paused. Denise, I think your parents may already suspect something is coming. I don't know how much, but the timeline may be moving faster than either of us expected. Does that change the plan? No, he said. It just means brace yourself sooner rather than later. Sometimes a frightened person does something reckless before the moment you're waiting for even arrives. I thought about that phrase for the rest of the day. Between patients, between the metallic taste of dental cleaning solution and the low hum of the overhead light in exam room 3, a frightened person does something reckless. I wondered what reckless would look like, coming from my father, a man whose entire personality was built around never once appearing frightened in front of anyone. I found out 4 days later. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, something he had not done in at least 6 years. He stood on my doorstep in his work clothes, not his church blazer. That told me something on its own. My father almost never let anyone see him in anything but his Sunday best posture. Can I come in? He said. Not really a question. I let him in. I did not offer coffee. Some old habits I was finally learning to retire. I talked to a man at the bank, he said, sitting at my kitchen table without being asked. The same table where my mother had once left lemon bars and made her own quiet request. He wouldn't tell me anything specific, but he asked some questions about the property. Made me think somebody's been digging around behind my back. Nobody's digging around behind your back, Dad. I found some things. That's different. What things? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had raised me on a steady diet of disappointment, dressed up as high standards. I decided, in that moment, I owed him exactly as much honesty as he had ever offered me, which was to say, some, not everything, only on my terms. I found out the land isn't worthless, I said. That's all I'm going to tell you right now. You'll understand the rest soon enough. His face did something complicated, something between anger and fear. Two expressions that had always looked nearly identical on him, ever since I was a little girl watching him from the back seat during arguments I wasn't supposed to understand. If there's money in that land, he said, it belongs to this family, to all of us, not just you. We'll see, I said, the most diplomatic thing I could manage. Because the truth, The actual legal truth, sitting in a folder on Depot Street, was considerably less generous to his position than we'll see implied. He left without saying goodbye, the way he always left. I sat at my kitchen table a long while after the door closed, feeling the particular exhaustion that comes from holding your ground against someone who spent your whole life training you to give it up first. I called Marcus that night to tell him about the visit. "That confirms it," he said. "They know something's coming. They just don't know what, or how much, or from where," which actually works in our favor. A man bracing for an unknown threat tends to make worse decisions than a man who knows exactly what he's facing. Is that going to make the dinner worse? "It might make it more honest," Marcus said. "Sometimes the cruelest things people say are the ones they say when they're scared, and don't yet understand why." I thought about that for the remaining days before the dinner, turning it over the way I turned over most hard things, slowly, without rushing toward a conclusion I hadn't earned yet. I went to work. I saw patients. I drove past the farmhouse once more that week, just to sit in the driveway a few minutes, engine off, looking at the house that had raised more of me than either of my parents' houses ever had. I thought about Ruth on that porch, shelling peas, telling me to count carefully. I understood it more fully now than at any point since her funeral. She'd spent her last years building me a floor to stand on, one nobody in my family could pull out from under me, no matter how hard they tried, no matter how many phone calls or lemon bars or unannounced doorstep visits, all of it trying to soften me into giving it away before I even understood what it was. The night before the dinner, I sat on my own small balcony, a cup of tea going cold beside me. I read Ruth's original note one more time, the one about counting carefully. I'd copied it out by hand onto an index card years earlier, without ever quite knowing why. I kept that card in my wallet. I still keep it there today. I did not know exactly what would happen the next night. I only knew I would not be the one raising my voice. 33 years of being underestimated in that family, and being underestimated one more time, right before the ground finally shifted, felt almost like a mercy. I went to bed early. I did not sleep well. I told myself that was fine. Some nights simply aren't for sleeping. Some nights are for lying quietly in the dark, counting, the way Ruth had taught me, waiting for morning to arrive on its own patient schedule. My Aunt Rosalind called from Arizona 2 days before the dinner. That surprised me. She almost never called anyone in Cedar Grove except around holidays. "I'm flying in for Amber's thing," she said. No preamble. Everyone in this family seemed to skip greetings once they had something on their mind. "I wanted to check in with you first. You've been quiet since the funeral." "I've been busy," I said, which was true, though not in the way she meant. "Denise, I signed away my interest in that estate. I didn't want the hassle of fighting your parents over a house I'll never live in. That wasn't about you. I always thought it was strange, honestly. How little you got out of that reading, given everything you did for your grandmother." I sat with that a moment. Nobody in my family had ever said it out loud before, not even close. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I mean it. Ruth used to call me, not often, once every few months. She'd ask about the desert, about my garden, small talk mostly. But near the end, the last year or so, she started asking strange questions. Whether I thought Wayne would ever really see what he had in you. Whether I thought Carol would ever stop measuring you against Amber. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth," Rosalind said. "I told her I didn't think either of them ever would. Not without something forcing the issue." I thought about that phrase for a long time after we hung up. Something forcing the issue. I wondered if my grandmother had been quietly interviewing the family for years, gathering opinions, confirming what she already suspected, long before she ever sat down with Marcus to build the second trust. The day before the dinner, I drove out to the cemetery where Ruth was buried, a small plot on a hill outside town, next to my grandfather, whose name I only really knew from the headstone, and the one photograph I'd later find in the roll-top desk. I didn't bring flowers. Ruth never much cared for cut flowers. She used to say they were just a slower way of watching something die. I brought instead a handful of pea pods from the farmer's market. It felt strange even as I did it, setting them on the grass in front of her headstone like some kind of offering only the two of us would understand. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, I said out loud, feeling a little foolish, the way you feel a little foolish talking to a headstone, and also feeling like it was exactly the right thing to be doing. But I think you knew it was coming. I think you've known for a long time. The wind moved through the grass on that hill, the way wind moves through grass on every hill in every cemetery, meaning nothing, and somehow meaning everything, depending on how badly you need it to. I'm not going to waste it, I told her. Whatever it is, I promise you that. I stayed there longer than I meant to, sitting on the grass beside the pea pods, watching the light change over the fields below, the same fields that ran, more or less, all the way to Milner Road, if you knew which way to walk. Marcus called me that evening, one final check-in before the dinner. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Steady," I said, and I meant it, which surprised me a little. I keep waiting to feel nervous. It just isn't coming. "That's your grandmother in you," he said. "She was the same way the whole time we built this. Absolutely certain. In a way most people never manage to be about anything. I used to ask her if she was worried the timing might backfire, might make things worse instead of better. She'd just look at me and say, 'Marcus, some things only get better after they get worse first. You can't skip that part no matter how much you'd like to.' She was right about a lot of things." "She usually was," Marcus said. "I'll see you tomorrow, Denise. 7 o'clock. Corner table. Try to get some sleep if you can." I did not get much sleep. I did not need much either. I lay awake for a while in the dark, running through the shape of what I knew, checking it the way you check a lock you already know is locked. Somewhere close to midnight, I finally drifted off, thinking about a chipped ceramic bowl and a porch that had taught me more about patience than either of my parents ever had. Amber texted me that morning. A short message. "See you tonight." So excited for everyone to be together, with 3 heart emojis attached. I looked at it for a long moment before typing back a simple, "See you there." There was nothing else true I could say, nothing that wouldn't spoil what neither of us yet understood was coming. I got dressed slowly that evening, chose a plain navy dress, one I'd worn to more than one difficult family occasion over the years, the kind of dress that says nothing and asks for nothing. I drove the familiar road toward the Wagon Wheel Steakhouse with the windows cracked, the summer evening air moving through the car, warm, ordinary, giving no sign at all of what was waiting for all of us inside. One more thing happened, the morning of the dinner itself. I think it belongs here, right before everything else. The last quiet moment I had before the whole shape of my life changed in a banquet room. I drove out to Milner Road early, before work, before anything, just to sit in the driveway a while, the way I'd been doing more and more that summer. The porch light was off, the way it always was now. Nobody living there to flip the switch each evening the way Ruth used to. I sat on the top step anyway. The wood familiar under me, worn smooth in the same spots it had always been worn smooth. I thought about all the Sunday mornings I'd sat in that exact place. A truck rolled slowly past on the county road. Some farmer heading out early. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel. That small rural wave everyone around here still gives, whether they know you or not. I lifted my hand back. Small things like that had always meant more to me than they probably should have. Proof the world kept moving in its ordinary, decent way, even on days that weren't ordinary at all. I thought about Ruth's 4 words on the back of that business card: "Don't let them sell the ground." I thought about her hospital hand around mine: "Don't apologize for taking what's yours." I thought about the list in her recipe box: the tires, the extra egg, 9 years of never once complaining about the drive. None of it felt like anger anymore, sitting there that morning. It felt like inheritance in the truest sense. Not the legal kind, though that was coming too. The kind that gets passed down in habits and hands, in small unspoken understandings between people who show up for each other, without needing to be thanked out loud for it. I got up eventually, brushed the dust off my jeans, looked at the house one more time, quiet and waiting in the early light. I said out loud to no one, "Tonight." Then I drove to work. I cleaned teeth. I smiled at nervous patients. I lived one more ordinary day before the extraordinary one arrived. The way you always do. The way everyone always does. Right up until the moment the ordinary finally runs out. The wagon wheel. Steakhouse smelled the way it always smelled: seared meat, yeast rolls, the faint vanilla of candles they light for special occasions, 40 chairs set in a long U around the banquet room, white tablecloths, my sister's initials and Derek's stenciled onto little chalkboard signs at the entrance, a wedding preview nobody had asked for. I arrived at 6:40, early enough to see the room before it filled. I noticed the corner table before almost anything else. A small 2-top tucked near the kitchen doors, set for one. A place card reading M. Whitcomb, family friend, written in my sister's wedding planner's careful calligraphy. Nobody else noticed it at all. Why would they? It was just a table. My parents arrived at 6:50. My father in the blazer he wore to every occasion that required one. My mother in a green dress I recognized from 3 Christmases ago. Reworn the way things get reworn in a family quietly running out of money, it hasn't admitted to itself yet. They greeted guests near the door. Warm, performative. My mother's laugh pitched slightly too high. The laugh she used when she needed a room to believe things were better than they were. Amber arrived at 7. Derek and his parents with her. The 4 of them moving through the room like a small parade, accepting congratulations, Amber's ring catching the light from every angle she turned it toward, which was most angles, because she made sure of that. I sat near the middle of the long table, between a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years and an empty chair. My aunt from Arizona would fill it later. She'd flown in for the occasion, already asking everyone within earshot about the farmhouse buyout, oblivious to anything happening beneath the surface of that question. Marcus arrived at 7:10, exactly as promised. Folder tucked under one arm. He moved to his small corner table, quiet and unremarkable. A man who's attended 1,000 events without once being the reason anyone remembers them. He ordered water. He did not order food. He watched. Dinner unfolded the way it always unfolds in my family. A slow accumulation of small performances. My father telling the same story about meeting my mother at a county fair. The one he tells at every gathering. My mother accepting compliments about the venue as though she'd paid for it herself. Amber and Derek feeding each other bites of appetizer for a photo that would be online within the hour. I ate my salad. I answered polite questions from the cousin beside me, my job, my apartment, whether I was seeing anyone. The standard inventory of a life being quietly assessed for how far behind Amber's it had fallen. I gave short, accurate answers. I did not elaborate. Somewhere around the second course, my father stood, tapped his fork against his water glass, the universal signal for a toast nobody had actually asked for. "I want to say something," he began, the way he always began, like the room owed him its attention simply because he'd decided to speak. "Amber, sweetheart, your mother and I couldn't be prouder." Polite applause. Amber beamed. Derek's mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, the way people do at other people's happiness after 2 glasses of wine. "This family has been through a lot this year," my father continued. I felt something in my chest go very still. I recognized the shape of a speech about to reach for a lie. "We lost my mother in the spring. That was hard on all of us." He did not look at me when he said all of us. He did not need to. We both knew whose Sundays had actually held the weight of that loss. "But tonight," he went on, raising his glass higher, "tonight is about looking forward, about a fresh start for this family. A new beginning we've all worked so hard for." There it was again. The phrase, the toast I'd already half lived once, in my own head, in the days leading up to this exact moment. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at Amber. And then, for reasons I will never fully understand, except that cruelty sometimes needs an audience to feel complete, my mother's eyes drifted to me, sitting quietly in the middle of the table. Something in her expression shifted, from performance into something colder, something that had been sitting under the surface of 3 phone calls and a tin of lemon bars, waiting for exactly this kind of room. "Speaking of family," she said, "not to my father, not really to the room, just loud enough to carry." She set her wine glass down with a small, definitive click. "Denise has been very difficult lately. About the house." A few heads turned. Not many. "Enough." "Mom," Amber said, a warning in it, though not a very strong one. "I'm just saying." My mother kept going. I watched her decide, in real time, to keep going, weighing a small cruelty against the relief of finally saying something she'd clearly been holding in for weeks. She looked at me directly now, something almost like triumph in it. The triumph of a woman who's finally found the room she needed for the thing she'd been rehearsing. "You were always the mistake, Denise. You know that." She said it light, almost cheerful, the way you'd mention the weather. Something so settled in her mind it required no more weight than a passing comment. My father laughed. A short one, through his nose, like he'd been waiting all night for someone else to say it first. Now that she had, he could enjoy it without having to be the one who said it. 40 people sat around that table. A dozen of them laughed too, the nervous kind. The kind that comes out before anyone's decided if a joke was actually a joke, or something else wearing a joke's clothes, because the truth was too ugly to say plainly. I picked up my water glass. I drank from it. I set it back down. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "I don't get loud," I told myself. The same words I'd been repeating for 3 weeks, ever since the quitclaim, ever since the business card, ever since a lawyer on Depot Street started teaching me, 1 phone call at a time, that patience could be its own kind of weapon. I get accurate. Amber's face had gone pale, glancing between our mother and me, the ring on her finger suddenly looking very heavy for how little it actually weighed. Derek's parents exchanged a look, the kind that says this family is stranger than the invitation let on. I looked at my mother. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. I held her gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough that her triumph started, almost imperceptibly, to curdle into something less certain. Then I looked away, toward the corner of the room, toward the small table by the kitchen doors. Marcus Whitcomb was already standing. He moved through the room the way he'd watched the family file past Ruth's casket 6 weeks earlier. Unhurried, unremarkable, until the moment he wasn't. He crossed to our table, folder in one hand. The room, sensing something shifting in its own temperature without yet knowing why, began to go quiet in patches. Conversation dying at the tables nearest us first, spreading outward like a ripple. "I apologize for interrupting," he said. Not loud, but carrying, the way a man carries a room after 30 years of learning how to do it without raising his voice. "My name is Marcus Whitcomb. I was Ruth Halloran's attorney for the better part of 3 decades. I have something I was asked to read, at exactly this kind of moment, in exactly this kind of room." My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. My father's hand, still holding his wine glass, had gone very still. "Marcus," my father said, a forced, brittle attempt at joviality. "This isn't really the time. I'm afraid it's precisely the time. Not unkindly." He opened the folder. Ruth was quite specific. He looked around the table once, taking in my parents, my sister, the 40 guests, almost entirely silent now, waiting. Then he looked at me, just me, the way he had at the funeral, and he began to read. "To whoever is in this room when this is read," Marcus began, his voice steady, pitched just loud enough to reach every table without straining. "My name is Ruth Eleanor Halloran. I am writing this 11 months before my lawyer tells me I have permission to let it be read aloud." The room had gone almost fully silent. Near the back, a server carrying dessert paused in the doorway, unsure whether to proceed. "I have watched my granddaughter Denise for 33 years," Marcus read. "Drive further, ask for less, and give more than anyone else in this family, without once being thanked for it in a way that matched what she gave. I have watched my son and his wife treat her steadiness as a resource instead of a gift. The way you'd treat a well you never worry about running dry." I felt my throat tighten. I did not cry. I kept my hands flat on the table, the way I'd learned to keep them flat during hard moments at work. A small discipline that kept the rest of me from following wherever my throat wanted to go. My mother had not moved. My father's wine glass was still frozen halfway to his mouth, as if setting it down might make this more real. "I suspect," Marcus continued, reading Ruth's words in his own calm voice, "that if you are hearing this, someone has said something unkind to Denise, in a room full of people, at a moment when they believed the matter of my estate was already fully settled. It was not." A murmur moved through the tables nearest us. Amber's face had gone from pale to something closer to gray. Derek's mother had stopped dabbing her eyes. Now she just stared, transfixed, at the man in the gray suit, holding a piece of paper about to rearrange the whole evening. At the general reading of my estate, Marcus read, "My son Wayne and his wife Carol received the farmhouse on Milner Road, and the modest savings I had set aside over a long life. I do not begrudge them that. It was theirs by right. I hope it has served them well. But there is a second matter, separate from that estate. Never part of the general reading, because I structured it that way deliberately, with the full knowledge and guidance of my attorney." My father set his wineglass down at last. The sound of glass meeting tablecloth seemed very loud in the silence. "15 years ago," Marcus read, "when I closed the dairy operation on our family land, I did not sell the mineral rights beneath that parcel, though I was advised more than once to do so, though my son told me repeatedly the ground was worthless clay and I should simply be rid of it." I watched my father's face at that line. Something in it started, almost imperceptibly, to fold inward. "I knew it was not worthless," Marcus continued reading. I had been approached, more than once, by an energy company interested in the mineral rights beneath that land, for a sum considerably larger than the value of the house itself. I turned down every offer, not because I did not need the money. There were years I certainly could have used it. But I wanted to be certain first. Certain that ground would end up protecting the one person in this family who never once asked me to protect her. The room was utterly still now. Even the server in the doorway had set down her tray. I established a separate trust 11 months before my death, Marcus read, funded by the mineral rights beneath the Milner Road parcel, naming a sole beneficiary. That beneficiary is my granddaughter, Denise Marie Halloran. The words hung in the air over the table for a long moment before anyone reacted at all. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. One thing more, Marcus read. I could hear it, even secondhand. Something in Ruth's own phrasing, like she was speaking directly into the room, aimed at whatever ugly moment had made this reading necessary. This trust is not a punishment of my son and his wife. It is not spite. It is simply an old woman correcting an old imbalance. In the only language this family has ever fully respected, paperwork. A short, strangled laugh escaped someone near the back, quickly stifled. Denise, Marcus read, and here his voice softened just slightly. If you are hearing this, I want you to know I counted every Sunday. I counted every drive. I never once mentioned it to you directly. I did not want you to think you were doing it for a reward. You were doing it because you are the kind of person who shows up. That kind of person deserves one thing in this life. One thing that cannot be taken from her. Not by people who never learned to see her clearly. Count carefully, dear. You will only need to do it once. I felt my composure crack for just a moment, hearing my own private phrase, the one she'd told me on the porch 100 times, read aloud in a banquet room full of strangers and family who had never once understood what it meant. Marcus paused. Let the room absorb that before continuing. To my son Wayne and my daughter-in-law Carol, he read. His voice took on a different register now. Careful, deliberate. A man reading words he knew would land like a verdict. I am aware, through channels I will not detail here, that you have used the farmhouse as collateral for debts unrelated to the property itself. I do not know the full extent. I suspect Denise's own attorney will, by the time this is read, know considerably more than I do. My father's face had gone from pale to something closer to ash. My mother had reached for her wine glass, then seemed to think better of it, her hand hovering, not quite committing. You both need to hear this plainly, Marcus continued reading. I do not believe either of you has ever fully understood it. Not in 30 years of taking Denise's steadiness for granted. The ground beneath that farmhouse, the ground you called worthless, has been generating quiet interest from an energy company for over 2 years. Had you known its true value, I have no doubt you'd have found a way to claim it for yourselves. The way you've claimed most things in this family that required someone else's patience to build. A woman I didn't recognize, near Derek's parents, whispered something to the man beside her. I caught only "oh my God" before it faded back into the room's held breath. I chose to protect it instead, Marcus read, by placing it entirely outside the reach of the general estate, in a trust that cannot be contested, dissolved, or borrowed against by anyone but its named beneficiary. My attorney assures me the structure is airtight. I trust him, the way I've trusted him for 30 years. And I trust that by the time you hear this, Denise will already understand exactly what it means for the refinance you arranged 4 months ago. Using collateral, you no longer fully control the way you believed you did. I watched my father's hand find the edge of the table. gripping it slightly. The way you grip something when the floor has started, very quietly, to tilt beneath you. Marcus folded the letter closed for a moment, set it on the table, reached into the folder for a second document. "There is one more piece of correspondence I was asked to bring tonight," he said, addressing the room directly now, his own voice, not Ruth's. A letter from Buckeye Ridge Energy Partners, dated 3 weeks ago, confirming a formal offer for the mineral lease beneath the Milner Road parcel. He read the figure aloud. It was not small. Down the table, my aunt from Arizona made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. The sound of a woman recalculating an entire decade of assumptions about a family she'd only ever seen from a distance. My mother had not said a single word since the reading began. My father's face had gone through several colors and settled, finally, on something gray and fixed. The expression of a man watching a structure he'd built on assumptions come apart, floor by floor, in real time, in front of exactly the people he had least wanted to see it happen. Amber sat frozen, her ring hand pressed flat against the tablecloth, looking at me now with an expression I had genuinely never seen on her face before, something that might, in a different family, in a different lifetime, have eventually grown into respect. "Denise," Marcus said, turning to face me directly, the room's 40 pairs of eyes swinging with him. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this personally, once the rest had been read." He held out a small sealed envelope, my name written across the front in Ruth's own careful hand. I took it. I did not open it yet. I looked instead at my mother, who had called me a mistake not 10 minutes earlier, in front of everyone she'd hoped would never learn otherwise. And I said the only thing I had planned to say all night, the only thing that felt, in that moment, both true and sufficient. "I don't get loud," I said quietly, my voice carrying anyway, the way quiet things sometimes carry further than shouting ever could. "I get accurate." Nobody clapped, nobody spoke. For a long moment, the only sound in that room was a busser near the kitchen, oblivious, still setting down water glasses at a table that had stopped noticing anything as small as thirst. My mother finally found her voice, though what came out of it was smaller than anything I'd ever heard from her. "This is a mistake. This has to be some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake, Carol," Marcus said, not unkindly, but without softening it either. "I drafted it myself, had 2 colleagues review the language independently, specifically because Ruth suspected it might one day be challenged. It will withstand a challenge. She wouldn't do this," my father said, finding his own voice now, rougher, edged with something between disbelief and the first stirrings of panic. "My mother wouldn't cut us out like this. She didn't cut you out of anything, Wayne," Marcus said. "You received the farmhouse, the savings, exactly as the general estate specified. This is a separate matter, one your mother built years in advance, specifically because she anticipated a moment very much like this one." My father's jaw worked, the way it did when he was building an argument he didn't yet fully believe himself. "The bank is going to want answers about that collateral." "I expect they will," Marcus said. "The recorder's office will confirm the Mineral Rights Trust was filed 11 months before your refinance closed. Whatever you told the bank about the value of that collateral will need to be reconciled with public record. I'm not your attorney in this, Wayne. I wouldn't presume to advise you, but I'd suggest you find one soon." Derek's father cleared his throat, glanced at his son with a look that said a great many questions about this marriage were suddenly being reconsidered in real time. Derek, for his part, had gone very quiet, one hand on Amber's shoulder, the gesture of a man who had clearly not signed up 6 months ago for an evening like this one. "Denise," Amber said. Her voice, when it finally came, was smaller than I had ever heard it, stripped of the practiced brightness she usually wore like a second skin. Did you know about this? No, I said honestly. Not until 3 weeks ago. And even then, only pieces of it. You knew something. I knew Grandma told me to count carefully, I said. I didn't know what I was counting until tonight, same as you. Amber looked at our mother, then our father, then back at me, something shifting behind her eyes. I recognized it, distantly, the early stages of a reckoning she hadn't been prepared to have. In front of her future in-laws, over dessert, at what was supposed to be the happiest dinner of her engagement. You said she was a mistake, Amber said quietly, turning to our mother now. There was an accusation in it that surprised me, coming from her. You said that at my dinner. Amber, this isn't the time. You said it in front of Derek's parents. Amber's voice was climbing now, not toward me, toward the two people who had spent her whole life training her to see me as a lesser fixture in the family furniture. You've been saying it my whole life. I just never really heard it until right now. My mother's face crumpled slightly, the practiced composure finally giving way to something closer to genuine distress. Though I noticed, even then, that her distress seemed aimed less at what she'd said to me, more at what it had cost her in front of an audience she cared about. I think, Marcus said, stepping gently into the widening silence, this might be a conversation better continued privately. I only came tonight to fulfill Ruth's instructions. I have no interest in prolonging anyone's discomfort beyond what was necessary. He looked at me once more. A small nod, the same nod he'd given me at the funeral. Then he collected his folder and walked, unhurried, back toward the door, leaving the room to absorb what had just happened without him. The dinner did not recover. Guests began finding reasons to leave within 20 minutes. Murmured congratulations to Amber and Derek, delivered with the strained politeness of people who'd witnessed something they weren't sure they were supposed to have seen. My aunt from Arizona hugged me on her way out. Longer than usual. She said only, "Your grandmother was smarter than all of us put together," before disappearing toward the parking lot. I sat at that table until nearly everyone else had gone, holding the small sealed envelope Marcus had given me. Not yet ready to open it in front of the family, I understood now, more clearly than ever. I did not need their permission for anything. My father approached me last, once my mother had already retreated to the car. Once Amber and Derek had gone to deal with his parents' shell-shocked questions in the parking lot. "You could have warned us," he said, his voice low, aimed only at me now that the audience had thinned. "I didn't know," I said again, calmly, because it was still true. I had learned that over the last 3 weeks. A true thing, said calmly, was stronger than any raised voice could ever be. But even if I had known, Dad, I'm not sure why I would have warned you about a document your own mother built. Specifically because she didn't trust you to treat me fairly if you knew about it in advance. He didn't have an answer for that. I watched him search for one and come up empty, the same way he'd come up empty on the phone 3 days earlier, insisting the land was worthless, insisting it was about simplicity. "We're going to need to talk about the house," he said finally. "The refinance. What this means for us." "You should talk to your attorney about that," I said. "I'm not the person who can help you anymore." I'm not sure I ever really was. I left him standing beside the empty chairs, the chalkboard sign with Amber and Derek's initials still propped by the door, the candles on the tables burning down to nothing nobody would notice until the staff came to clear them. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat, unopened. I did not cry until I was parked in my own driveway. Engine off, the porch light of my apartment building glowing steady through the windshield. It was not a sad cry. I've thought about that many times since, and I'm sure of it. It was the kind of cry that comes when something you've been carrying, without realizing how heavy it was, finally gets set down. I opened the envelope there, in the car, in the quiet. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Ruth's handwriting, smaller and shakier than I remembered it, clearly written near the end, Denise. By the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll have just sat through a room full of people finding out what I always knew. I'm sorry it took a public moment to make them see it. I tried, more than once in quieter ways. It never landed the way it needed to. Your parents only ever seem to hear things when everyone else can hear them too. I want you to do something for me, and I want you to actually do it. Not just think about it and let it pass. The way you let so many things pass because you're too kind to hold on to your own anger. Take the money. Take all of it. Don't split it. Don't give half to Amber to smooth things over. Don't let your father talk you into using it to save the house he refinanced without telling you. This was never about the house. It was about you finally having something in this life that nobody can quietly take credit for or quietly take away. Build something with it. Not for them, for you. I loved you the way I should have loved all my grandchildren, and didn't. Because I let your parents' favoritism become the family's weather for far too many years without saying anything. This is me finally saying something. Count carefully, dear. You already did. Now go live like someone who knows exactly what she's worth. All my love, always, Grandma Ruth. I read it 3 times before I started the engine again. I did not go back inside the restaurant. I did not call my parents that night, or the next morning, or for several days after that. I let the silence do what silence had always done best in my family. I let it sit there, undisturbed, exactly as long as it needed to. The first call came 4 days later, not from my parents, from a number I didn't recognize, a loan officer at the bank, asking careful procedural questions about the Mineral Rights Trust, whether I'd be willing to provide documentation confirming its filing date. I gave Marcus's office number instead of my own. That was becoming a habit, a good one, letting the right professional carry the right weight instead of absorbing it myself. The way I'd absorbed everything in that family for 33 years. Marcus called me that evening to fill in what he could. The bank's underwriting team is reviewing the file, he said. When your parents refinanced, the appraisal assumed the land carried no separate mineral interest. Once the trust filing surfaces in the title search, and it will, because it's public record, the collateral value on their loan changes substantially, not in their favor. What does that mean for them? It means the bank will likely require them to pay down the loan, or refinance again at worse terms, given they're already behind. It's not criminal, Denise. Nobody's going to jail, but it's going to be expensive, at the worst possible time for them. I sat with that a moment, waiting to feel something like satisfaction, finding instead something quieter, more complicated, a kind of tired acceptance. Consequences, once set in motion, simply move at their own pace, regardless of how anyone feels about them. There's something else, Marcus said. The bank flagged an inconsistency. Your parents listed the refinance purpose as home improvements. The underwriter is now asking questions about actual use of funds, given that a chunk of it appears to have covered a defaulted business loan for your sister's boutique. Is that fraud? It's a gray area, Marcus said carefully. Loan applications sometimes list generic purposes that don't perfectly match end use. Banks don't always chase it down, unless something else draws their attention first. The mineral rights discovery is what's drawing their attention now. I'd expect them to face, at minimum, a demand for partial repayment. At most, some kind of formal review. I thought about my father's voice on the phone, 3 weeks earlier. insisting it was about simplicity, cleaning up loose ends. I thought about the toast, to a fresh start, offered without any of the 40 people in that room understanding what the fresh start had actually been built on. My mother called 2 days after that, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it, none of the sharpness that usually rode underneath even her friendliest requests. "The bank called," she said. "They want to review our loan." I heard something about that. "Denise, please. Whatever's happening with the trust, can you talk to them? Explain we didn't know the land was worth anything?" "I can't explain anything to your bank, Mom. I'm not a party to your loan, and I wouldn't know what to explain even if I were. Everything I know, I learned the same night you did. Your father thinks you planned this. My father can think whatever helps him sleep," I said, keeping my voice level, accurate, the way Ruth's letter had asked me to be. "I didn't plan a single part of that dinner. Grandma did. She planned it years before either of us knew we needed it planned." A long silence on the line. I could hear her breathing. I could picture her sitting at her own kitchen table now, the one where she used to turn her coffee cup in a quarter circle while she recalculated. Except this time there was nothing left to recalculate toward, no lever left to pull. "I shouldn't have said what I said," she told me finally, so quietly I almost didn't catch it. "At the dinner. I shouldn't have called you that." "No," I agreed. "You shouldn't have. I was scared about the money. I said something cruel because I was scared, and I took it out on you, because you've always been the one who could take it." I thought about that phrase for a long moment. The one who could take it. 33 years distilled into 5 words. Offered now not quite as an apology, but as the closest thing to self-awareness my mother had ever managed in my presence. "I could always take it," I said. That was never the same thing as it being fair to ask me to. She didn't have a response to that. I let the silence sit between us until she finally said, "I don't know what happens now." I told her honestly that I didn't either. This particular uncertainty belonged to her and my father now, not to me. I did not offer the money. I thought about it, briefly, in the days after that call, some old reflex stirring, the reflex that had driven 40 minutes each way for 9 years without ever once being asked to. But then I thought of Ruth's letter, folded now in my nightstand drawer, her handwriting small and certain. "Don't split it. Don't give half to Amber to smooth things over. Don't let your father talk you into using it to save the house he refinanced without telling you." This was never about the house. She had known, somehow, even from wherever she was writing that letter, exactly which reflex in me would need naming out loud to be resisted. Amber came to see me 3 weeks after the dinner, showed up at my apartment on a Sunday afternoon. The first time she'd ever driven to see me without being asked, without an occasion attached, without a favor riding underneath the visit. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, sitting at the same small kitchen table where our mother had once left a tin of lemon bars as a down payment on a request, "about what I said on the phone before the dinner, about not making things weird. I remember. I think I spent my whole life making sure things weren't weird around you, which really just meant making sure nobody ever had to notice how much you were doing, or how little anyone thanked you for it. I think I did that because noticing would have meant admitting something about myself too. I didn't say anything right away. I let her sit in that admission, giving her room instead of rushing to fill the space with reassurance she hadn't quite earned yet. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "Not about the money, or the trust, or any of it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I wanted to actually mean it. Not just say it because Mom told me to smooth things over before the wedding." "Did she tell you to smooth things over before the wedding?" Amber gave a small, rueful laugh. "Obviously. But that's not why I'm here. I promise. I studied my sister for a long moment. This woman I had grown up beside without ever quite growing up with. And I found, somewhere underneath 30 years of quiet resentment, that I still had room to believe her. I appreciate you saying that, I told her. I do. But it's going to take more than one Sunday afternoon before I fully believe it's not just another version of asking me to make things easy for everyone else again. That's fair, she said. Plain, unguarded. None of her usual practiced lightness. And something in that made me think, maybe for the first time in either of our lives, we were finally having an honest conversation instead of a managed one. She stayed for coffee. We didn't talk about the wedding or the trust or our parents. We talked about small things, the kind sisters talk about when they're not performing sisterhood for an audience. When she left, she hugged me at the door, longer than she needed to. She said only, "I'm glad it was you. Whatever Grandma built, I'm glad it landed with the person who actually deserved it." It was not everything. It was not a full repair of 33 years. But it was something true, offered without an angle attached. I had learned over the last month to recognize the difference, to let the true things count for exactly what they were worth. No more, no less. The county recorder's office in Cedar Grove sits in a squat brick building on Courthouse Square, the kind of place that still uses a bell above the door, records kept in filing cabinets older than most of the staff who maintain them. I went there myself, 6 weeks after the dinner. Not because I needed to, legally. I wanted to see the filing with my own eyes, the way you sometimes need to touch a thing to fully believe it's real. The clerk who helped me, a woman named Patricia Doyle, had worked there longer than I'd been alive. She pulled the file without much comment, the way she probably pulled 100 files a week, until she got to the date stamp. Then she glanced up at me with the faint recognition of someone who reads the local paper. "Halloran," she said. "You're the granddaughter, the one from the dinner everybody's talking about." Cedar Grove is small enough that a family scandal moves through it the way weather moves through a valley. Fast, total. Everyone under the same cloud within days. "That's me," I said. "Your grandmother came in here herself, you know. 11 months before she passed. Sat right where you're sitting. Had me walk her through every line of that filing twice, just to be sure it was airtight." I remember thinking, that's a woman who's planning something. "She was?" I said. "She just didn't tell anyone what." Patricia slid the file across the counter. Stamped and dated exactly as Marcus said it would be. 11 months prior. Recorded clean and unchallengeable in the public record. This county had no idea, until 6 weeks ago, it was sitting on a quiet piece of family history, one about to detonate at an engagement dinner. "For what it's worth," Patricia said, closing the file gently. "Your grandmother used to come in here every few months, long before this filing, just to check on the old dairy parcel's tax assessment. Years of it. I always figured she was sentimental about the land. Now I understand she was just making sure nobody moved it out from under whoever she meant to leave it to." I thanked her and left with a certified copy of the filing in my bag, though I hadn't needed it. Not really. I think I mostly needed to hear a stranger confirm it. In a small brick building on Courthouse Square, none of what happened at that dinner had been luck, or spite, or even really revenge. It had been years of quiet, deliberate care, filed and dated and witnessed, long before anyone at that table said a single unkind word. My father's situation, over the following 2 months, unfolded exactly the way Marcus predicted. Methodical, entirely without drama. The way most real financial ruin tends to unfold. Not a single dramatic collapse. A series of increasingly uncomfortable letters and phone calls, adding up, slowly, into something undeniable. The bank required a partial repayment within 90 days, once the corrected collateral value came through underwriting. My parents did not have that money. They tried, I heard later, through Amber, to negotiate a longer timeline, citing the age of the house, their decades of good standing, the sentimental value of a property that had been in the family for 3 generations. The bank, unmoved by sentiment the way banks generally are, gave them 60 days instead of 90, suggested they consider selling. They sold the farmhouse in the spring to a young couple from Columbus looking for a fixer-upper outside the city, for a price that covered the loan but left almost nothing behind. My father, Amber told me, cried when the moving truck pulled away. The first time she could remember seeing him cry about anything that wasn't sports-related. I did not go to watch them move out. I did not feel triumphant about it either, which surprised me a little, given how many years I'd spent quietly absorbing the weight of being called difficult, complicated, a mistake. In that very house's kitchen, mostly I felt something closer to a settling. The kind of quiet that comes after a long overdue accounting has finally been made. Whether or not anyone involved feels good about the numbers. Amber's boutique debt, the one that started this whole chain of consequences 2 years earlier, remained a separate matter entirely. My parents were still working through it with a different set of creditors. A slower, less public unraveling than the mineral rights reveal had been, but a real one nonetheless. Derek's family, I heard, had quietly begun asking harder questions about the wedding budget. Who was contributing what? Whether the down payment my parents had once toasted so confidently would ever actually materialize. My mother called me once more near the end of that spring, not to ask for anything this time, just to tell me they'd found a smaller place, a rental 2 towns over, closer to my father's brother, who'd offered them a spare room until they got settled. "I wanted you to hear it from me," she said, "before you heard it from Amber, or from someone in town." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. It was the first time in longer than I could remember that she'd told me something simply to be honest with me, rather than to secure something from me in return. "I know I don't get to ask this," she said, her voice careful, testing the ground the way you test ice you're not sure will hold you. "But I hope someday we can find our way to something, not what we had. I understand that's gone, but something." "I hope so too," I told her, honestly, because it was true, even if I couldn't yet picture what that something would look like, or how long it would take to arrive, if it ever fully did. "But it's going to take you actually seeing me, Mom, not just noticing me when it's convenient, or when there's a document involved." "I know," she said. "I'm trying to understand what that even looks like. I don't think I ever really practiced it. It was not an apology exactly. It was not a resolution. But it was something," I thought. Driving home that evening, past the turnoff for Milner Road, past the farmhouse that no longer belonged to anyone I was related to. The beginning of something honest, more than I had ever really expected from either of my parents. Maybe more even than Ruth herself expected. Sitting down 11 months before her death, writing a letter meant for exactly this kind of table, where cruelty finally ran out of places to hide. The mineral lease with Buckeye Ridge Energy Partners closed in early summer. It took longer than I expected. Surveys, environmental assessments, a small army of consultants driving out to Milner Road in trucks with company logos on the doors, walking the fence line with clipboards while I stood on the porch and watched, feeling strangely like a spectator at my own life. Daniel Reyes turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s. His business card was the one that started this whole unraveling, falling out of the pages of a Bible. He'd corresponded with my grandmother for nearly 3 years before she died. She was tough, he told me, the day we signed the final paperwork, in a conference room in Columbus. My own attorney sat beside me, reviewing every line before I initialed it. Not Marcus this time. A woman he'd recommended who specialized in mineral rights. Toughest negotiator I dealt with that whole year. And she wasn't even negotiating for money most of the time. She kept asking me questions about environmental protections, about restoration requirements. What would happen to the land 20 years after the wells stopped producing? Most landowners want to know about the check. She wanted to know about the dirt. That sounds like her, I said. Something warm settled in my chest. Hearing a stranger describe a version of my grandmother I recognized completely, patient, specific, quietly unwilling to be rushed by anyone who mistook her calm for a lack of resolve. The lease payment, once it came through, was substantial. I sat with the number for a full week before I did anything with it at all. I did not buy a new car. I did not move to a bigger apartment. I thought often about Ruth's letter. Folded now inside a small frame on my dresser, the actual handwritten original locked safely in a deposit box. A copy kept where I could see it every morning. Build something with it. Not for them. For you. I bought back the farmhouse. It took some doing. The young couple from Columbus who'd bought it from my parents in the spring had already started renovations, already fallen for the wide front porch and the old barn out back. I didn't want to force anyone out of a home they'd just started to love. So instead, I offered something else. A fair price on the house, if they were willing to sell, plus an unusually generous timeline to find their next place. Plus, at Daniel Reyes's suggestion, a modest signing bonus that would have made my father's eyes bulge had he known the figure. They said yes within a week. Turned out, the wife told me over coffee, they'd been having second thoughts. Such an old property, so far from the city. We sat in what used to be Ruth's kitchen. My offer arrived almost exactly when they needed a graceful way out. I moved into the farmhouse on Milner Road in late August, into the same kitchen where Ruth used to shell peas, the same sitting room where the roll-top desk still sat, unlocked now. Its long-hidden drawer finally open. Inside, exactly what I'd expected by then. The original mineral lease documents Ruth had kept close for 15 years. A small stack of letters between her and Daniel Reyes. And, tucked at the very back, a single black and white photograph. Ruth as a young woman, standing in front of that same barn, with a man I didn't recognize. My grandfather, dead before I was born. Both of them squinting into a sun that had set decades before I was ever handed the memory of it. The desk key turned out to open a small safe deposit box at the Cedar Grove branch of the county's oldest bank. Exactly as I'd suspected the moment I found it hidden inside the base of an old flower pot on the porch. Another small breadcrumb Ruth had left. Patient, specific, for whoever finally thought to look. Inside the box was the original signed mineral lease from 15 years earlier. The one Ruth had negotiated privately and never told a single member of her own family about. Along with a note, shorter than the letter Marcus delivered at the dinner, written in the same careful hand. In case anyone still doubts it was real, the note read, "It was always real." I just decided who got to know. I framed that note too, hung it in the sitting room, near the roll-top desk, where I could see it every time I passed through the room on my way to somewhere else. Amber's wedding happened that October, smaller than originally planned, at a modest venue instead of the country club Derek's parents once favored. The down payment my parents had promised never fully materialized, the way the toast at the engagement dinner once implied it would. I attended. I sat in the second row, not the front, the way I'd sat at Ruth's funeral. I watched my sister marry a man who'd stood quietly beside her through an unraveling neither of them expected. And I found I was genuinely happy for her, uncomplicated by the old resentments that once colored almost everything I felt about my family. My parents sat across the aisle, in the small rental house's borrowed formal wear. My father's suit a size too large now, the kind of ill fit that comes from a man losing weight under stress. Not by design. They did not approach me during the reception. I did not approach them either. Amber threw her bouquet, laughing. It landed entirely by accident in the hands of our elderly aunt from Arizona. She'd flown back for the wedding, immediately declared she was too old for this nonsense, beaming the whole time. In that moment, I caught my mother's eye across the room. She smiled at me, small, uncertain. I smiled back. It seemed like the right thing to do. I'd learned over the past year that small, true things were worth acknowledging, even when the larger repair still had a long way to go. Marcus and I stayed in touch, long after the estate matters had all been settled, long after there was any real professional reason for either of us to still be talking. He came out to the farmhouse once, that autumn, to see what I'd done with the place, walking the property with his hands in his pockets, taking in the barn, the freshly painted porch railing, the small plaque I'd had made for the fence line, marking the property as the Ruth Halloran Family Land Trust, a formality that meant, practically speaking, nothing would ever again be sold out from under whoever inherited it next. Not without the kind of deliberate, years-long protection Ruth herself had built. She'd be proud of this, Marcus said, standing at the edge of the yard, looking out toward the parcel. Somewhere beneath the grass and the old fence posts, the wells were already quietly producing, funding the trust for decades to come. She'd probably tell me I was being sentimental, I said, keeping the barn standing when I could have torn it down and built something more efficient. Probably, Marcus agreed, smiling. But she kept it standing herself for 15 years, past the point it made any practical sense. I think you're honoring her exactly the way she'd have wanted, even if she'd never admit it out loud. I thought about that for a long time after he left, standing alone on the porch as the evening settled in. That particular gold light of a Cedar Grove autumn falling across the land. It had waited, patient and quiet, for exactly the right person. Someone who'd finally understand what it had always been worth. I used part of the trust income that first year to set up a small scholarship at the county's community college, named for Ruth, aimed specifically at students studying dental hygiene or nursing, the kind of steady, unglamorous work that keeps a community running without ever asking for recognition. I did not announce it widely. I did not need anyone to know it had come from me. I understood, better than I once had, that some of the most important things a person does are the ones nobody ever claps for. I also, quietly, paid off the remainder of Amber's boutique debt, the original 2-year-old failure that started this entire chain of consequences. Not because Ruth's letter had asked me to. In fact, somewhat against its explicit instruction not to smooth things over for anyone. But by then, the debt had become something separate from the cruelty at the dinner table, something that belonged only to my sister and the mistakes of a 28-year-old woman trying to build a business before she was ready. I did not tell her it was me. I let her believe, for a long while, the creditor had simply written it off. Until one evening, months later, she figured it out on her own and called me crying. Not from guilt or obligation this time. From something that sounded, finally, like genuine gratitude untangled from expectation. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "After everything?" "Because Grandma built me a way to finally have something that was mine," I told her. And having something that's truly yours means you get to decide, freely, what parts of it you want to share. And with whom. I wanted to share this part with you. Not because you asked, because I chose to. She didn't have a response for that beyond a long, quiet cry on the other end of the line. I let her have it, the way I'd learned to let people have their reckonings without rushing to fill the silence for them. Winter came to Cedar Grove the way it always comes. Slow at first, then all at once. Frost silvering the fence posts along Milner Road. The barn settling into the particular quiet old wooden buildings take on once the cold sets in for good. I spent most of that season learning the farmhouse the way you learn a person, one room at a time, which floorboards complained under weight, which windows let in a draft no weather stripping seemed to fully solve, which corner of the kitchen caught the morning light exactly the way Ruth once described it to me. Years earlier, I hadn't understood back then why she bothered mentioning something so small. My mother called twice that winter, both times brief, both times careful in a way that felt new for her, less like a woman managing an outcome, more like a woman genuinely unsure of her footing, trying, clumsily, to find some. The second call, she asked if she could come see the farmhouse sometime, not to discuss anything, just to see it. I said yes. I did not know, hanging up the phone, whether it would go well or badly. I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I was at peace with either outcome, which was its own kind of freedom I hadn't expected the trust to provide. She came on a Saturday in February, alone, without my father, driving up in the same sedan she'd had for years, looking smaller against the winter landscape than I remembered her looking at any point in my childhood. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment without saying anything, taking in the room the way you take in a place that used to belong to someone whose absence you're still learning to carry. She used to make me nervous in this kitchen, my mother said finally, running one hand along the edge of the counter. Your grandmother, not because she was unkind. She never raised her voice at me once in 30 years, but she saw things. She saw right through whatever I was trying to present, every single time. I never quite figured out how to stop feeling exposed around her. I think that's mostly what I inherited from her, I said. Not the land, that part. Seeing things clearly, not needing to raise my voice about what I see. My mother nodded slowly. Something like recognition moved across her face. The recognition of a woman finally connecting two things she'd spent years keeping carefully separate in her own mind. I used to tell myself you were just harder to love, she said quietly, not looking at me now, looking out the window toward the barn. Because you didn't need as much from me as Amber did. I told myself that meant you needed less love. Not that you were simply better at surviving without it. I understand now those aren't the same thing at all. I didn't say anything right away. There are apologies that arrive years too late to undo the damage they're apologizing for. This was one of them. We both knew it. And I think we both also understood the lateness didn't make it worthless, only limited. A partial repair on a foundation that would never again be fully sound, but might, with care, hold up something smaller and more honest than what had stood there before. Thank you for telling me that, I said. I don't know exactly what to do with it yet, but I'm glad you said it. I don't expect you to know what to do with it, she said. I'm not even sure I know what to do with it myself. I just didn't want to keep carrying it around unsaid. The way I've carried around most things in this family for 30 years. We had coffee. We talked, carefully, about small things. The renovations I was planning for spring. Amber's new job. The mild winter Cedar Grove was having compared to years past. It was not a reconciliation. Not fully. Not yet. But it was, I thought, watching her drive away down the long gravel driveway an hour later, a kind of beginning, the kind Ruth's letter had never promised me, but had in its own quiet way made possible. By finally forcing the whole family to stop performing a closeness none of us had actually built. My father did not come that winter, or the following spring. Amber told me gently that he was still struggling, not just financially, with something harder to name, a kind of quiet shame that had settled over him since the dinner. The particular shame of a man who'd spent his whole life deciding how things would go, discovering, all at once, the ground beneath his decisions had been managed, far more carefully than his own, by a woman he'd spent decades underestimating. I did not push him. Some repairs take longer than others. Some, I had come to accept, might never fully happen at all. And that acceptance, difficult as it was some days, felt more honest than the alternative, waiting, indefinitely, for an apology that might never arrive in a shape I could actually use. Spring returned to Milner Road the way it always had, the way it had for the whole 80 years Ruth lived on that land before me. The fields greening slowly at first, then all at once, the way most real changes tend to happen, invisible for a long stretch, then suddenly, undeniably, complete. I planted a small garden that April, near the porch, nothing ambitious, just the kind of thing Ruth herself used to keep. Tomatoes, beans, a row of sweet peas along the fence line. It felt right, somehow, to keep something growing in that particular soil, something that had nothing to do with mineral rights or trust filings, nothing to do with any of the machinery that brought me back to this house. Daniel Reyes stopped by one afternoon in May, on his way to inspect a wellhead further down the county road. He found me on the porch shelling the season's first peas into a bowl I'd found, unexpectedly, in the back of Ruth's kitchen cabinet. The same chipped ceramic bowl I remembered from childhood, its edge worn smooth from decades of hands exactly like mine. "Your grandmother used to do that," he said, nodding toward the bowl, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "Sit right there and shell peas while we talked business." Drove my colleagues crazy, honestly. Meetings that should have taken 20 minutes stretched to an hour, because she refused to hurry. "She used to tell me to count carefully," I said, smiling a little, feeling the familiar weight of the pods in my hands, the small, satisfying click of each one splitting open. "I always thought she just meant the peas." "Knowing her," Daniel said, smiling back, "I doubt she ever meant just one thing by anything she said." He drove on toward the wellhead a few minutes later. I stayed on the porch a while longer, the late afternoon light falling gold and low across the fields, the way it always seemed to fall on Milner Road in the last hour before dinner, the same light Ruth must have sat in 1,000 times before me, patient, unhurried, building something none of us understood the shape of, until it finally, quietly, arrived. I finished the bowl of peas as the light dropped lower, the barn's shadow stretching long and thin across the yard. I thought, one last time, about the dinner table at the Wagon Wheel Steakhouse, the wine glass set down with its small, definitive click, 5 words that were once meant to diminish me, instead becoming the exact hinge on which an entire family's fortune quietly turned. I set the empty pods aside and looked out at the land, green, certain, finally, fully mine. Grandma always said count carefully. I only had to do it once.